Hello, welcome back to me. Last time we finished Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and we're going to start Alice through the looking glass and what Alice found there. And there's a little introduction of a poem here. Child of the pure, unclouded brow and dreaming eyes of wonder, though time be fleet, thou art half a life asunder. Thy loving smile will surely hail of a fairy tale. I have not seen thy sunny face, nor laughter. No thought of me shall find a place in thy young life here. Enough that now thou wilt not fail to listen to my fairy tale. A tale begun in other days when summer suns were glowing. A simple chime that served and rhymes of our rowing. Whose voice live in a memory yet, and visions years would say forget. Come hearken then, ere read, with bitter tidings laden, shall summon to unwell melancholy maiden. We were but older children, dear, we are but older to fret to find our bedtime near. Without the frost and blinding snow, storm winds moody madness. Within the firelight and childhood's nest of gladness, the magic words shall hold thee fast, shalt not heed the raving blast. And though the shadow of the sigh, my story, for happy summer days gone by and vanished summer glory, it shall with breath of bale and pleasantness of our fairy tale. Through the looking glass house. The white kitten had nothing to do with it. It was the entirely. For the white kitten had been having its face washed by the old quarter of an hour, and bearing it pretty well considering. So you see that it couldn't have had any hand in the mischief. The way Dinah washed her children's was this. First she held the poor thing down by its ear with one paw, and then with its face all over, the wrong way, beginning at the nose, and just now, as I set hard at work on the white kitten, which was laying quite still and trying to purr, no doubt feeling it for its good. But the black kitten had been finished in the afternoon, and so, while Alice was sitting curled up in a corner of the grate, half talking to herself and half asleep, the kitten had been having a grand romps with the ball of worsted Alice had been trying to wind up, and had been down till it had all come undone again, and there it was, spread over the hearthrug, all knot, with the kitten running after its own tail in the middle. "Oh, you wicked, wicked little Alice," catching up the kitten and giving it a little kiss to make it understand that it was in. "Really, Dinah ought to have taught you better manners. You ought, Dinah, you know," she added, looking reproachfully at the old cat, and speaking in as cross a voice as. And then she scrambled back into the armchair, taking the kitten and the worsted with her, and began winding. But she didn't get on very fast, as she was talking all the time, sometimes to herself. Kitty sat very demurely on her knee for the progress of the winding, and now and then putting out one paw and gently touching the ball, glad to help if it might. "Do you know what?" Alice began. "You'd have guessed if you'd been up in the window with me. Only Dinah was so you couldn't. I was watching the boys getting in sticks for the bonfire. Of sticks, Kitty. Only it got so cold, and it snowed so. Leave off. Never mind, Kitty. We'll go and see the bonfire tomorrow." Here's 2 or 3 turns of the worsted round the kitten's neck, just to see how it would look. To a scramble in which the ball rolled down upon the floor, and yards it got unwound. I never realized through the looking glass must take place on November 4th, Bonfire Day. "Do you know, I was so angry, Kitty," Alice went on, comfortably settled again. "When I saw all the mischief you had been doing, I was very nearly putting you out in the snow. And you'd have deserved it, you little mischievous darling, for yourself. Now don't interrupt me," she went on, holding up one finger. "I'm going all your faults. Number 1, you squeaked twice while Dinah was washing her face. Now you can't deny it, Kitty. I heard you. What's that you say?" Pretending that her paw went into your ear. "Well, that's your fault for keeping your eyes open. Them tied up, it wouldn't have happened. Now, Don't make any more excuses, but listen. You pulled Snowdrop away by the tail, just as I had put down the saucer of milk before. What, you were thirsty, were you? How do you know she wasn't thirsty too? Now for number three, every bit of the worsted while I wasn't looking. That's three faults, Kitty, and you wished for any of them. You know I'm saving up all your punishments for Wednesday. Suppose they had saved up all my punishments, she went on, talking more to herself. What would they do at the end of the year? I would be sent to prison, I suppose, or let me see. Suppose each punishment was to be going without dinner. When the miserable day came, I should have had to go without 50 dinners at once. I should much. I'd far rather go without them than eat them. Do you hear the snow panes, Kitty? How nice and soft it sounds. Just as if someone was all over outside. I wonder if the snow loves the trees and fields so gently. And then it covers them up snug, with a white quilt. It says, "Go to sleep, darlings, till the summer comes again." And when they wake up, they dress themselves all in green and dance about whenever the wind blows. Oh, that's cried Alice, dropping the ball of worsted to clap her hands. And I do so wish it. I'm sure the woods look sleepy in the autumn when the leaves are getting brown. Can you play chess? Now, don't smile, my dear. I'm asking it seriously. You were playing just now. You watched just as if you understood it, and when I said check, well, it was a nice check, Kitty, and really I might have won if it hadn't been night that came wriggling down among my pieces. Kitty, dear, let's. And here I wish I could tell you half the things Alice used to say. Her favorite phrase, "Let's pretend." She had had quite a long argument only the day before, all because Alice had begun with, "Let's pretend we're queens." And her sister, who liked being very exact, had argued that because there were only two of them, and Alice had been reduced to say, "Well, you can be then, and I'll be all the rest." And once she had frightened her old nurse by in her ear, "Nurse, let's pretend that I'm hungry, a hyena, and you're a bone," taking us away from Alice's speech to the kitty. "Let's pretend queen, Kitty. Do you know, I think if you sat up and folded exactly like her. Now do try, there's a dear." And Alice got the Red Queen off it up before the kitten as a model for it to imitate. However, the thing didn't pretend, Principal said, because the kitten wouldn't fold its arm properly. So, to punish it, she held a glass that it might see how silky it was. And if you're not good directly, she put you through into the looking-glass house. Would you like to? How would you like that? Now, if you'll only attend, Kitty, and not talk so much, my ideas about Looking-Glass House. First, there's the room you can see through the glass, the same as our drawing room, only the things go the other way. I can see when I get up upon the chair, all but the bit just behind the fireplace. I do so wish I could see that bit. I want so much to know whether they've a fire in the. You never can tell, unless our fire smokes, and then smoke come out of the room too. But that may be only a pretense, just to make it at a fire. Well then, the books are something like our books, only the words go the wrong. I know that because I've held up one of our books to the glass, and then they hold up one in the other room. How would you like to live in Looking Glass House, Kitty? I wonder if they give you milk. Perhaps Looking Glass milk isn't good to drink. But oh, Kitty, the passage. You can see just a little peep of the passage in Looking Glass House to our drawing room wide open, and it's very like our passage as far as you can go. It may be quite different on beyond. Oh, Kitty, it would be if we could only get through into Looking Glass House. I'm sure it's beautiful things in it. Let's pretend there's a way of getting through into it, though. Let's pretend the glass has got all soft like gauze, so that we can. Why, it's turning into a sort of mist now, I declare. It'll be easy. She was up on the chimney piece while she said this, though she got there, and certainly the glass was beginning to melt away, just like mist. In another moment Alice was through the glass, and had jumped into the Looking-Glass room. The very first thing she did was to look whether in the fireplace, and she was quite pleased to find that there was a real one, blazing as the one she had left behind. So I shall be as warm here in the room, thought Alice. Warmer, in fact, because there'll be no one here to scold me away from the fire. Oh, what fun it'll be when they see me through the glass in here and can't get. Then she began looking about and noticed that what she could see from the old room was uninteresting, but that all the rest was as different as possible, for inches on the wall next to the fire seemed to be all alive, and the very clock on the chimney-piece, only see the back of it in the looking-glass, had got the face of a little old man there. You don't keep this room so tidy as the other, Alice thought to herself, noticed several of the chessmen down on the hearth among the cinders. But it with a little was surprised. She was down on her knees, hands and knees, watching. Chessmen were walking about, two and two. Here are the Red King and the Red Queen, in a whisper for fear of frightening them. And there are the White King and the one sitting on the edge of the shovel. And here are two castles walking arm in arm. I hear me, she went down as she put her head closer down. And I'm nearly sure they can't. I feel somehow as if I were invisible. Here something began squeaking on the table, and made her turn her head just in time to see one of the white paws. "It is the voice of the White Queen," cried out as she rushed past the king, so that she knocked him over among the cinders. "My precious Lily, my imperial kit!" And she began scrambling wildly up the side of the fender. "Imperial fiddlestick," said the king, which had been hurt by the fall. He had a right to be a little annoyed with the queen, for he was covered with ashes from head to foot. Alice was very anxious to be of use. The poor little Lily was nearly screaming herself into a fit. She hastily picked up and set her on the table by the side of her noisy little daughter. The queen gasped, and that rapid journey through the air had quite taken her away her breath, and for a minute or two nothing but hugged the little Lily in silence. As soon as she had recovered her breath a little, called out to the White King, who was sitting sulkily among the ashes. "Mind the volcano," said the king, looking up anxiously into the fire, as if he thought it was the most likely place to blew me up, panted the queen, who was still a little out of. "You cover up the regular way. Don't get blown up." Alice watched the White slowly struggled up from bar to bar, until at last he said, "Well, you'll be adding to the table at that rate. I'd far better help you." The king took no notice of the question. It was quite clear that he could neither hear. So Alice picked him up very gently and lifted him across more slowly to the queen, that she mightn't take his breath away. But before she could put him on the table, she thought she would dust him a little. He was so covered with ashes. She said afterwards, never seen in all her life such a face as the king made when he found himself held in the invisible hand and being dusted. He was far too much astonished. His eyes and his mouth went on getting larger and larger and rounder, till her with laughter that she nearly let him drop upon the floor. "Oh, please, such faces, my dear," she cried out, quite forgetting that the king couldn't hear her. "You make me hardly hold you. And don't keep your mouth so wide open. All the ashes will get into it. I think you're tidy enough," she added. She smoothed his hair and set him upon the queen. The king immediately fell flat on his back and lay perfectly still, a little alarmed at what she had done, and went round the room to see if she could find any over him. However, she could find nothing but a bottle of ink, and when she got found he had recovered, and he and the queen were talking together in a frightened whisper, so that Alice could hardly hear what they said. The king was saying, "I assure you, cold to the very end of my whiskers." To which the queen replied, "You have whiskers." "The horror of that moment," the king went on. "I shall never forget." "You will, though," the queen said, "if you don't make a melodrama of it." Alice looked with interest as the king took an enormous memorandum book and began writing. A sudden thought struck her, and she took hold of the end of the pencil some way over his shoulder and began writing for him. The poor king looked puzzled and struggled with the pencil for some time without saying anything, but Alice was too, and at last he panted, "My dear, I really get a thinner pen. I can't manage this one a bit. It writes all manner of things that I don't intend. What? Said the Queen, looking over the book, in which Alice had put a white knight on poker. He balances very badly. That's not a memorandum of your feeling. There was a book lying near Alice on the table, and while she sat watching the white king, was still a little anxious about him, and had the ink all ready in case he fainted again. She turned over the leaves to find some part that she could read, all in some language I don't know. She said to herself, it was this. She puzzled over this, but at last a bright thought struck her. Why, it's a looking-glass book, of course, and if it were glass, the words will all go the right way again. This was the poem that Alice Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre waves. All mimsy were the borer groves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Bewalk, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub and the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal snake, and long time the maxim foe he sought. He said so rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came with hold ye would, and burbled as he came. 1, 2, through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head a lumping back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my armish boy. O frabjous day, Callooh, Callay, he chortled in his joy. And the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. O mim groves, and the mome raths outgrabe. It seems very pretty, she said, but it's rather hard to understand. You see, she didn't like to confess even to her make it out at all. Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't know what they are. However, somebody killed something, that's clear at any rate. Alice, suddenly jumping up. If I don't make haste, I shall have to go back through the looking-glass before I've seen what the house is like. Let's have a look at the garden first. She was out of the room and ran downstairs, or at least it wasn't exactly running, but a new in getting downstairs quickly and easily, as Alice said to herself. She just kept the tips on the handrail and floated gently down without even touching the stairs with her feet, then through the hall, and would have gone straight out the door in the same way if she hadn't caught hold. She was getting a little giddy, too, with so much floating in the air, and to find herself walking again in the natural way. Chapter 2. The Garden of Live Flowers. Far better, said Alice to herself, if I could get to the top of that hill. And here's a path to it, at least. No, it doesn't do that, after going a few yards beyond the path and turning several sharp corners. But I suppose it will at last. How curiously it twists. It's more like a corkscrew than a path. Well, this hill, I suppose. No, it doesn't. This goes straight back to the house, but on right the other way. And so she did, wandering up and down and trying turn after turn, but all the house, do what she would. Indeed, once, when she turned a corner rather more quickly than usual, she ran herself. She ran she could stop herself. It's no use talking about it, Alice said, looking up at the house viewing with her. I'm not going in yet again. I know I should have to get through again, back into the old room, and there'd be an end of all my adventure. She resolutely turned her back again upon the house, and set out once more down to keep straight on till she got to the hill. For a few minutes all went on well, and saying, I really shall do it this time, when the path gave a sudden twist and shook itself, described it afterward, and the next moment she found herself actually walking in at the... Oh, it's too bad, she cried. I never saw such a house with for way, never. However, there was the hill in full sight, so to be done, but to start again. This time she came upon a large flower of daisies and a willow tree growing in the middle. Oh, Tiger Lily, she addressing herself in to one that was waving gracefully about in the wind. We can talk, said the Tiger Lily, when there is anybody worth talking to. Alice was so astonished that she couldn't speak for a moment. It quite seemed to take her. At length, as the tiger lily only went on waving about, she spoke again, almost in a whisper. "And can all flowers talk?" "As can," said the tiger lily, "and a great deal louder." "It isn't manners for us to begin, you know," said the rose, "and I really was wondering when you'd speak. Said I to myself, it's got some sense in it, though it's not a clever one. Still, you're the right color, and "I don't care about the color," the tiger lily remarked. "If only her petal more, she'd be all right." Alice didn't like being criticized, asking questions. "Aren't you sometimes frightened at being planted? I care for you." "There's the tree in the middle," said the rose. "What else is it good for?" "But what could it do if any danger came?" Alice said. "It could bark," said Rose. "It says bow wow," cried a daisy. "That's why its branches are called—" "Didn't you know that?" cried another daisy, and here they all began to shout. Terror seemed quite full of little shrill voices. "Silence, every one of you!" Tiger Lily, waving itself passionately from side to side and trembling with excitement. It panted, bending its quivering head toward Alice. "So they wouldn't dare to do it. Or they wouldn't dare to do it." "Never mind," Alice said in a soothing voice, and lilies, who were just beginning again, she whispered, "If you don't hold your tongues, I'll pick you." There was a silence in a moment, and several of the pink daisies went white. "That's right," said the tiger lily. "The daisies are the worst of all. When one speaks together, and it's enough to make one wither to hear the way they go on." "How is it you talk so nicely?" Alice said, hoping to get it into a better temper. I've been in many gardens before, but none of the flowers could talk." "Down and feel the ground," said the tiger lily. "Then you'll know why." Alice did not. "It's very hard," she said, "but I don't see what this has to do with it." "And," the tiger lily said, "they make the beds so soft, so all the flowers are always asleep." It sounded a very good reason, and Alice was quite pleased to know it. "I never thought of that before. It's my opinion that you never think at all," the rose said in a rather severe. "I never saw anybody that looked stupider," a violet said, so suddenly that Alice, for it hadn't spoken before. "Hold your tongue," cried the tiger lily, "as if you know anybody. You keep your head under the leaves and snore away there till you know no more what's going than if you were a bud. Are there any more people in the garden besides me?" Not choosing to notice the rose's last remark. "There's one other flower in the garden about like you," said the rose. "I wonder how you do it." "You're always wondering, but she's more bushy than you are." "Is she like?" asked eagerly, for the thought crossed her mind. "There's another little girl in the garden." "Well, she has the same awkward shape as you," said the rose, "but she's rather shorter, I think. Her petals are done up close, almost like a dahlia. The tide, not tumbled about anyhow like yours." "But that's fault," the rose added kindly. "You're beginning to fade, you know, and then one can't help being a little untidy." Alice didn't like this idea at all. So, to change the subject, she asked, "Does she ever come out here?" "I dare say you'd see her soon," said the rose. "She's one of the thorny kind." "Where does?" Alice asked with some curiosity. "Why, all round her head, of course," the rose. "I was wondering you hadn't got some too. I thought it was the regular rule." "She's coming!" cried the larkspur. "I hear her footsteps thump, thump, thump along." Alice looked round eagerly and found that it was the Red Queen. "She's grown," was her first remark. She had indeed, when Alice first found her in the ashes, been 3 inches high, and there she was, half a head taller than Alice herself. "Fresh air that does it," said the rose. "Wonderfully fine air it is out here." "I'll go and meet her," said Alice, for though the flowers were interesting enough, she'd far grander to have a talk with a real queen. "You can't possibly do that," said the rose. "I advise you to walk the other way." This sounded nonsense to Alice, but set off at once toward the Red Queen. To her surprise, she lost sight of her and himself walking in at the front door again. A little provoked, she drew back and everywhere for the Queen, whom she spied out at last along way off, she thought she was this time of walking in the opposite direction. It succeeded beautifully, and walking a minute before she found herself face to face with the Red Queen and in full sight of the hill she was so long aiming at. "Where do you come from?" said the Red Queen. "Look up, speak nicely, and don't twiddle your fingers all the time." To all these directions and explained as well she could that she had lost her way. "I know what you mean by your way," said the Queen. "All the ways about here belong to me. Why did you come out here at all?" she added in a kinder tone. "Curtsy while you're thinking what it's time." Alice wondered a little at this, but she was too much in awe of the Queen. "I'll try it when I'm done," she thought to herself. "The next time I'm a little late for dinner." "It's time for you to answer now," the Queen said, looking at her watch. "Open your mouth a little when you speak, and always say 'Your Majesty.'" "I only wanted to see like Your Majesty." "That's right," said the Queen, patting her on the head, while Alice didn't like it all. "Though when you say garden, I've seen gardens compared to this would be a wilderness." Alice didn't dare to argue the point, but "And I thought I'd find my way to the top of the hill." "When you say hill," interrupted, "I could show you hills in comparison with which you'd call this a valley." "No, I shouldn't," said Alice, surprised into contradicting her at last. "A hill can't be a valley, you know. That would be nonsense." "The red, you may call it nonsense if you like," she said. "But I've heard nonsense compared that would be as sensible as a dictionary." Alice and Curtsy were afraid from the Queen's tone that she was a little offended, and silence till they got to the top of the hill. For some minutes Alice stood without speaking out in all directions over the country, and a most curious country it was. There were neat little brooks running straight across it from side to side, and the ground between was divided by a number of little green hedges that reached from brook to brook. "I did just like a large chessboard," Alice said at last. "There ought to be some meadows somewhere." "And so there are," she added in a tone of delight, and her heart beat quick with excitement as she went on. "It's a great huge game of chess that's been all over the world, as if this is the world at all. If this is the world, oh, what fun it is! How I wish I was one of them. I wouldn't mind being a pawn. I might join, though of course I should like to be a queen best." She glanced at the real Queen as she said this, but her companion only smiled pleasantly and said, "Easily managed. You can be the White Queen's pawn if you like. As Lily is too young, you're in the second square to begin with. When you get to the eighth square, you'll be a queen." At this moment, somehow or other, they began to run. Alice never could quite make it over afterward how it was that they began. All she remembers is that they were ran, and the Queen went so fast that it was all she could do to keep up with her. The Queen kept crying, "Faster, faster!" but Alice felt she could not go fast. She had no breath left to say so. The most curious part of the thing was that other things around them never changed their places at all. However fast they went, they never seemed to pass anything. "I wonder if all the things move along with us," puzzled Alice. And the Queen seemed to guess her thoughts, for she cried, "Fast talk!" Not that Alice had any idea of doing that. She felt as if she would be able to talk again. She was getting so much out of breath until the Queen cried, "Fast!" dragged her along. "Are we nearly there?" Alice managed to pant out at last. "Nearly," repeated. "Why, we passed it 10 minutes ago. Faster!" And they ran on for silence, with the wind whistling in Alice's ears and almost blowing her hair off. Fancied. "Now, now!" cried the Queen. "Faster, faster!" And they went fast, that at last they seemed to skim through the air, hardly touching the ground with their foot. Suddenly, just as Alice was getting quite exhausted, they stopped, and she found herself breathing, breathless and giddy. The Queen propped her up against a tree. "You may rest a little now." Alice looked round her in a great surprise. "Why, I do believe we've been under this tree the whole time. Everything's just as it was." "It is," said the Queen. "What would you have it?" "Well, in our country," said he a little, "you generally get to somewhere else. If you ran very fast for a long time, moving." Slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here you see the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you just run as fast as that. I'd rather not try, please, said Alice. I'm quite okay here, only I am so hot and thirsty. I know what you'd like, said the Queen good-naturedly, taking a little box out of her pocket. Alice thought it would not be very civil to say no, and did all what she wanted. So she took it and ate it as well as she could, and it was very dry. Thought she had never been so nearly choked in all her life. Why, you're right, said the Queen. I'll just take the measurements. And she took a ribbon out of her pocket, marked in inches, and began measuring the ground and sticking little pegs there. At the end of 2 yards, she said, putting in a peg to my distance, I shall give you your directions. Have another biscuit? No, thank you, said Alice, once quite thirst quenched, I hope, said the Queen. Alice did not know what to say. Luckily, the Queen did not wait for an answer, but went on. At the very end of 3 yards, them, for fear of your forgetting them, and at the end of 4, I shall say goodbye, and at the end I shall go. She got all the little pegs put in, and Alice looked on with great interest as she returned to the tree, and then began slowly to row. At the 2-yard peg she faced round and said, Upon squares in first move, you know. So you'll go very quickly through the 3rd railway, I should think, and you'll find yourself in the 4th square in no time. Square belongs to Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The 5th is mostly water. The Humpty Dumpty. But you make no remark? I didn't know I had then, Alice faltered on. You should have said, the Queen went on in grave reproof. It's extremely kind of you to tell me all this. Suppose it said, we'll suppose it said, there's all forest. However, one of the knights will show you the way, and in the 8th square you shall be queens together, and it's all feasting and fun. Alice got up and curtsied again. At the next peg the Queen turned again, and this time she said, French, when you can't think of the English for a thing, turn out your tongue and remember who you are. She did not wait for Alice to curtsy this time, but waited to the next peg, where she turned for a moment to say thank you, and then hurried on to the last. How it happened Alice never knew, but exactly as she came to the last peg she was gone, whether she vanished into the air, or whether she ran quickly into the wood, and she can rest, thought Alice. There was no way of guessing, but she was gone, and Alice wished she was a pawn, and that it would soon be time for her to move. Chapter 3. Looking Glass. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice as she stood on tiptoe, able to see a little further. Principal rivers. Their principal mountains. I'm on the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. Mountains. Why, what are those creatures making honey down there? These. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood there silent, watching one of them that was bustling about amongst the flowers, its proboscises into them, just as if it was a regular. However, this was anything but a regular bee, infinite, as Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Such as with the roots taken off and stalks put in them. And what quantity they must take. I think I'll go down and... No, I don't think just yet, she went on, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill and trying to find some excuse why so suddenly. It'll never do to go down among them with a branch to brush them away. And what fun it'll be when they ask me how I liked my way. Oh, I liked it well enough. Here came the favorite little toss of her head. So dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so. I think I'll go down the, she said after a pause, and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I want to get into the 3rd square. So with this excuse she ran down the hill and jumped over the little brooks. "Tickets, please," said the guard, putting his head in. In a moment everybody was holding out a ticket. They were all about the same size as the people's. Some and quite seemed to fill the carriage. "Now then, child," said the guard, looking angrily at Alice, and a great many voices all said together, in chorus of a song that Alice, "Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, this time's worth £1,000 a minute." "I'm afraid I haven't got one," Alice said in a frightened. "There wasn't a ticket office where I came from." And again the chorus of voices went on. "There wasn't one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000. "Don't make excuses," said the guard. "You shall have brought one from the engine driver. You should have bought one from the engine driver." And once more the chorus of voices went on with, "A man that dried the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff." Alice thought to herself, "They're speaking." The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken, but as they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand that what thinking in chorus means that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. "I shall dream about £1,000 tonight, I know I shall," thought Alice. And the guard was looking at her first through a telescope, then through a microscope or glass. At last he said, "You're traveling the wrong way," and shut up the window and went away. "So young a child," said the gentleman sitting opposite her. He was dressed in paper. "Ought to know which way she is going, even if she doesn't know her own name." A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said in a low, "She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet." There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers, and as the rule seemed to be that they should all speak in turn, he went on with, "You'll have to go back from here as luggage." Alice couldn't see who they were beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice spoke next. "Shake," it said, and there it choked, and it was obliged to leave off. "Sounds like," Alice thought to herself, and an extremely small voice close to her ear said, "You might make a joke on that, something about horse and horse, you know." A little voice in the distance said, "You must be labeled last with care, you know." After the other voices went on, "What a number of people there are in the carriage," thought Alice, "saying, 'Go by post,' as she's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by the telegraph, draw the train herself the rest of the way," and so on. But the gentle paper leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take it every time the train stops." "Indeed I shan't," Alice said, rather impatient. "It doesn't belong to this railway journey. I don't belong to this railway journey at all just now, and I wish I could get back there." "You might make a joke on that," said the little voice here. "Something about 'you would if you could,' you know." "Don't tease so," saying about in vain to see where the voice came from. "If you're so anxious to have a joke, don't you make one yourself?" The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it. If it would only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it hadn't come close to her ear. The conscience of this was that it tickled her ear very much, off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. "I know you," the little voice went on, "a dear friend and an old friend, and you wouldn't hurt me. I'm an insect." "What kind of insect?" Alice inquired a little anxiously. She really didn't know what she really didn't know, whether it could sting or not. But she thought this wouldn't be quite a simple question to ask. "What, then, you don't?" the little voice began, when it was drowned out scream from the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse had put his head out the window, quietly drew it in, and said, "It's only to jump over." Everybody seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous against jumping at all. "However, it'll take us into the fourth square, that's some," she said to herself. In another moment she felt the carriage rise straight up into the her fright. She caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat. but the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting under some trees, while the gnat, for that is what was that had been talking to her, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head. And it certainly isn't a very large gnat. It's certainly not about the size of a chicken, Alice thought. Still, she couldn't feel nervous about it after they had been talking together so long. Like all insects, the gnat went on as quietly as if nothing had happened. I like them when they can talk, Alice said. None of them ever talk where I come from. What sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from? The gnat inquired. I don't rejoice at all, Alice explained, because I'm rather afraid of them. At least the large. I can tell you the names of some of them. Of course they answer to those names, carelessly. I never knew them to do it. What's the use of their being named? The gnat said, if they won't answer to them. No use to them, Alice, but it's useful to the people that name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all? I can't say, the gnat replied. Further down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time. Well, there's the horsefly. Alice began counting off the names on her fingers. The gnat, halfway up that bush, you'll see a rocking horsefly if you look. It's made entirely about by swinging itself from branch to branch. What does it live on? With great curiosity. Sap and sawdust, said the gnat. Go. Alice looked at the rocking horsefly with great interest and made up her mind that it must have been just repainted. It looked so bright and sticky. And then she went on, then there's the dragonfly. Look on that branch above your head, said the gnat, and there's your dragonfly. Its body is made of plum pudding. Its wings of holly leaves burning is a raisin burning in brandy. Alice asked as before. Frumenty mince pie, the gnat replied, and it makes its nest in a Christmas box. The butterfly, Alice went on, after she had taken a good look at the insect with it, and and had thought to herself, I wonder if that's the reason it's fond of flying into candles, because they want to turn into